My aunt was still smiling when I walked through the front door. The smile didn't last. I hadn't slept more than 3 hours the night before. I'd driven 4.5 hours from Chicago with 2 coffees and a granola bar, and when I pulled into the driveway of the house I had purchased 7 months ago, I noticed immediately that there was a truck I didn't recognize parked in the spot where my father always kept his green lawn chairs. The chairs were gone. The welcome mat my mother had picked out, the one with sunflowers on it, was gone too. There was a pair of men's boots sitting outside the door like someone lived there. Someone who wasn't my parents. I sat in my car for a moment. I breathed. Then I got out, walked up the porch steps, and opened the door with my key. Let me back up, because none of this will make sense without context, and the context matters more than people realize when a story like this starts somewhere in the middle. My parents immigrated here from the Philippines when I was 3 years old. My father worked overnight shifts at a bottling plant for 11 years. My mother cleaned offices downtown, Monday through Saturday, for most of my childhood. I remember being 12 years old and waking up at 5 in the morning to the sound of her leaving before the sun came up, her shoes quiet on the stairs because she didn't want to wake my brother and me. I remember my father coming home smelling like metal and plastic, eating reheated rice at the kitchen table while the rest of us slept. They never complained. Not once. Not to us. I was the first in my family to go to college. I got a partial scholarship and worked 25 hours a week at a campus dining hall to cover the rest. After I graduated, I got a job as a junior analyst at a financial services firm in Chicago, and I worked myself into a senior position over the next 6 years. I am 31 years old. I drive a used Honda. I have one houseplant that I've managed not to kill for 2 years, and I am genuinely proud of that. I don't say any of this to make myself sound impressive. I say it because the choices I made for the last decade were not random. They were pointed. They were aimed at one specific thing. My parents were renting a 2-bedroom apartment in Milwaukee. They had been renting that apartment for 9 years. My mother had been dealing with a bad knee for 3 of those years, and the stairs had become genuinely difficult for her. My father's back had gotten worse. They were both in their early 60s, and my mother had just retired from her cleaning job, and my father was 6 months from his own retirement. And I had been quietly, carefully saving and investing for 4 years with the specific goal of buying them a home before that happened. I didn't tell them. I didn't tell anyone in my family. I told my best friend, and I told my therapist, and that was it. I found the house in March. It was a 3-bedroom ranch-style home about 40 minutes outside Milwaukee on the edge of a small lake. It had a screened-in porch that faced the water. It had a single-level floor plan, which meant no stairs for my mother's knee. It had a small garden bed along the south side of the house where my father, who had been talking about growing tomatoes for 15 years, could finally do exactly that. It was listed at $360,000. I had been pre-approved. I made an offer the same week. I closed on the house in May. I put it entirely in my name because I was the buyer, and I wanted the legal structure to be clean and uncomplicated. My plan was to gift it to my parents formally, with an attorney's help, after I presented it to them. I had already spoken to a real estate attorney about the transfer process. I had a folder on my laptop with every document organized by date. I am a financial analyst. Organized is the only way I know how to be. My parents' 40th wedding anniversary was in September. That was the date I chose. I told them I was throwing them a small dinner party at a venue I'd rented, and I asked them to pack an overnight bag because I'd booked them a hotel nearby. My mother asked 3 times if I was sure it wasn't too much trouble. I told her it wasn't any trouble at all. My aunt, my mother's younger sister, found out about the house 2 weeks before the anniversary dinner. I don't know exactly how she found out. My best guess is that she was visiting my parents at their apartment and saw something, a piece of mail I'd sent to their address, or maybe my mother, who is genuinely the worst secret keeper I have ever known, let something slip. What I do know is that my aunt called me on a Tuesday evening in late August and said, in a tone that I can only describe as professionally warm, that she had heard the most wonderful news and that she was so happy for the family. I kept my voice even. I said I didn't know what she was referring to. She laughed. She said, "Oh, come on, the lake house. Your mom is so excited." I felt something cold move through my chest. I said that the details were still being worked out and I'd prefer if we kept things quiet until the official day. She agreed immediately, cheerfully, and we hung up. I called my mother right after and asked her gently whether she'd mentioned anything about a possible gift to anyone. My mother was quiet for a second and then said she might have said something small to my aunt. Just a hint? She was just so excited. I told her I loved her. I told her not to worry about it. But I did worry about it. I worried enough that I called my attorney the next morning and asked a few clarifying questions about the timeline for the deed transfer. I worried enough that I started keeping the volume up on my phone in case anything unusual came through. I don't know if I had a specific fear at that point or just a general unease. My aunt had always been charming in a way that made me feel slightly off balance. She and her husband had borrowed money from my parents twice in the last 5 years. The second time, the amount was significant, and neither loan had been repaid. My parents had never asked for it back. They weren't people who asked for things back. The anniversary dinner was on a Saturday. I drove to Milwaukee Friday night, picked up my parents the next morning, and drove them to the lake house under the pretense that I wanted to show them the venue before the other guests arrived. When my mother saw the house, she put both hands over her mouth and didn't say anything for almost a full minute. My father got out of the car slowly and walked to the edge of the porch and looked out at the water, and I watched his shoulders do something I had never seen them do before, which was completely let go. He looked like a man who had just set down something very heavy after carrying it for a very long time. I started crying before either of them did. We went inside. My mother opened a cabinet in the kitchen. She turned the faucets on and off. She stood in the middle of the screened porch and looked at the lake and said, quietly, "This is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." My father found the garden bed and crouched down and touched the soil with 2 fingers. We had the dinner that evening. 12 people. Close friends, my brother and his girlfriend, my parents' neighbors from their old apartment. My aunt and her husband came too, because of course I had invited them, because at that point I still had no reason to do otherwise. The evening was perfect. My parents were radiant. My aunt hugged my mother and cried a little and told me I was a remarkable daughter, and I thanked her, and everything felt exactly the way I had imagined it would feel. I drove back to Chicago the following Sunday with my heart full. I had a meeting with my attorney scheduled for the following Thursday to begin the formal deed transfer process. I had every intention of having my parents' names on that house within 30 days. I got a call on Wednesday. It was my mother. Her voice was strange, not upset. Exactly, but careful, in a way that made me pull over before she had even finished her first sentence. She said that my aunt and her husband had come by the house that morning. They had brought boxes. My aunt had told my mother that she and her husband were going through some financial difficulties, and that since there were 3 bedrooms, and my parents were only 2 people and family helps family, she had assumed it would be all right if they stayed for a little while. Just temporarily. While they sorted things out. My mother said she hadn't known what to say. She said my aunt had been so warm about it, and her husband had already started bringing in bags, and she didn't want to make a scene. And could I please call my aunt and talk to her because my mother didn't know how to handle it? I sat in my parked car on the side of a street in Evanston, and I stared at my windshield, and I breathed for about 15 seconds. I said, "Mom, don't unpack anything of theirs. Don't let them put furniture in the main bedroom. I'm going to call you back." I called my attorney first. I explained the situation. I want to be clear about something important. Because the deed was still entirely in my name, because the transfer to my parents had not yet been completed, I was the sole legal owner of that property. My aunt and her husband had no right to be in that house without my explicit permission. They were, from a legal standpoint, trespassing. My attorney confirmed this. We talked through my options. I wrote down everything he said on the back of a receipt I found in my center console. I called my aunt. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was warm and slightly surprised, as if she had been expecting a social call. She said, "Oh, I was just going to call you. Isn't the light on the lake gorgeous in the morning? Your mother made the most wonderful breakfast." I said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully." She stopped. I told her that the house was in my name. I told her that no permission had been given for anyone to move in, and that what she had done by bringing boxes and bags and presenting it to my mother as a settled matter was not acceptable. I told her that I needed her and her husband to remove their belongings by the following afternoon. She was quiet for a moment. Then her voice shifted. It didn't get louder, exactly, but it got harder, the warmth dissolving the way ice does when you pour something hot over it. She said that I was being ridiculous. She said that my parents were her family, not just mine, and that this house was clearly meant to be a family home, not my personal property to control. She said the word control in a way that was meant to land like an accusation. I said that I understood she saw it that way. She said that she had spoken to my mother, and my mother agreed that family should be welcome in a family home. I said that my mother was a woman who found it almost impossible to say no to people she loved, and that I was not going to allow that quality to be used against her. There was a pause. Then my aunt said, "You always thought you were better than the rest of us. Ever since you moved to Chicago, You think your money makes you the one who decides everything. I had expected something like this. I had thought about it on the drive home from the anniversary dinner. Actually, not because I had wanted to, but because a part of me had always known that the version of this story where everyone was simply happy for my parents was not the only version that could exist. I said, "This conversation isn't about me or you. It's about a legal matter. I'll follow up in writing." I sent an email that evening. Formal, clear, no emotional language. I outlined that the property at that address was solely in my name, that no tenancy agreement had been offered or accepted, and that I was requesting that all personal belongings be removed by 4 o'clock the following afternoon. I copied my attorney. I kept the tone the way I keep my spreadsheets, factual, organized, clean. My aunt did not respond to the email. Her husband called my father instead. My father told me about it that night, his voice low and tired in a way that broke something in me. He said my uncle-in-law had told him that I was being selfish and cold, that the house should belong to the whole family, that money didn't buy the right to make decisions for everyone. He said my uncle-in-law had told my father that if my parents let me run things this way, they were going to end up lonely and isolated with a daughter who saw them as a charity project. My father was quiet after he said all of that. Then he said, "Is the house yours, Anak?" I said yes. I told him exactly how it was structured legally and why I had done it that way, and that I had been in the process of transferring the deed to him and my mother when this happened. He was quiet again. Then he said, "Okay, then do what you need to do." That was all he said. But it was enough. I drove back up on Thursday morning, 4.5 hours. I brought a folder of printed documents and I called my attorney on the way and confirmed everything one more time. I had the copy of the deed. I had the email chain. I had the notes I had taken during every phone call. When I pulled into the driveway, there was that unfamiliar truck again, and my mother's sunflower mat was still gone. I walked up the porch steps and put my key in the lock and opened the door. My aunt was in the kitchen. Her husband was in the living room with his feet on the coffee table my mother had brought from the apartment. My mother was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a look on her face that I recognized the look she got when she was trying very hard to keep the peace and was not succeeding. My aunt saw me and her expression did the thing it had done on the phone, warm to hard in an instant. Her husband started to say something. He stood up and said that I had no right to come in here and make demands, that I needed to think about what I was doing to this family. I set my folder on the kitchen table. I said, calmly, "This is the deed for this property? My name is on it. That is the only name on it. I have given no one permission to reside here, and that permission is not being granted." My aunt looked at my mother. My mother looked at the table. My aunt said, "Mom, tell her." My mother pressed her lips together. She looked at the tea in her cup. Then she looked at me, and her eyes were steady in a way that I had not fully expected, and she said, "I think you should go." She was talking to my aunt. The silence after that was the kind that has weight to it. My uncle-in-law started talking again. Louder this time, something about respect, something about ingratitude, something about what kind of daughter does this to her family. And I let him finish because I had learned a long time ago that people who are losing tend to get loud before they go quiet, and waiting is almost always more effective than interrupting. When he stopped, I said, "You have until 4 o'clock. I'll be here." I sat on the porch and looked at the lake. My mother came out after about 10 minutes and sat in the chair next to mine and didn't say anything for a long time. A heron flew low over the water. The morning light was doing something extraordinary to the surface of the lake, the kind of thing that's difficult to describe and impossible to photograph accurately. My mother said, "She called me 3 times after the dinner. She kept saying, 'The family house,' like she had already decided what it was." I said I understood. My mother said, "I should have told her to leave when they showed up with boxes. I knew something was wrong. I could feel it." I put my hand over hers. I said, "You know it's hard for you to do that? That's not a character flaw. It's just how you're built. That's why I'm here." She squeezed my hand. She didn't say anything else for a while. By 2:30, they were loading the last boxes into the truck. My uncle-in-law didn't speak to me. My aunt paused at the door on her way out and looked at me for a long moment and said, "You'll regret how you handled this." I said, "I hope you find stable housing soon. I mean that sincerely." She left. My mother's sunflower mat was inside, leaned against the hallway wall. I put it back on the front porch where it belonged. My father arrived that evening. My brother had driven him up from Milwaukee. My father walked through every room slowly, the way he had the first time, and when he came out to the porch where I was sitting, he pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than any hug I could remember him giving me since I was a child. He smelled like the same soap he had always used, and it made me feel 7 years old and completely safe at the same time. I met with my attorney the following week. The deed transfer was completed 22 days later. My parents' names are on that house. It is theirs in every legal sense. I am not on the deed. That was always the plan, and the events of that week did not change it. I heard through my cousin, a few months later, that my aunt and her husband were renting an apartment about 40 minutes from the lake house. I hope they are okay. I am not being sarcastic when I say that. I genuinely hope they are okay. What they tried to do was wrong, and what my uncle-in-law said to my father was cruel, and the fact that I bear them no particular malice does not mean that I was willing to let it happen. Those two things can be true at the same time. Last month, I drove up to visit my parents for the first time since everything settled. It was a Saturday in early spring, and the lake was still cold, but the ice had just broken up, and the water had that particular blue-gray color it gets in the weeks before it warms. My father had put up a small, raised garden bed along the south wall. He had already started planning what he was going to plant. He showed me a list he had written in his careful, slanted handwriting. Tomatoes, peppers, basil, possibly squash if there was room. My mother had unpacked her cookbooks onto the kitchen shelf, organized by region the way she had always wanted but never had space to do in the apartment. She had found a farmer's market 40 minutes away that she was planning to drive to every Saturday starting in May. I sat on the screened porch in the evening and watched the heron, possibly the same one, possibly a different one. I have no way to know, move slowly along the far edge of the water. My mother brought out 2 cups of tea and sat in the chair next to mine, and we stayed like that until the sun was completely gone and the only light was coming from inside the house behind us, yellow and warm through the windows. I have thought a lot, since everything happened, about the word family and the way it can be used as a door and a weapon at the same time. My aunt used it as a weapon. She said family, home, and family should help family, and this is what family does. And what she meant by all of those phrases was, I am owed something because of a word. I have decided that words like that, words that are supposed to mean love and connection and roots, don't get to be used as leverage. They don't get to be an argument in a dispute about a deed. A word is not a legal document. Love is not a blank check. My parents worked for 40 years. They got up before the sun, and they came home after dark, and they asked for very little, and they gave almost everything. What I wanted to give them was not a transaction, and it was not a project, and it was not, as my uncle-in-law said, charity. It was the only language I had learned well enough to speak fluently. The language of making something solid and real out of work and time and intention. A boundary is not cruelty. A boundary is a way of telling the truth. And sometimes the truest thing you can say to someone who is trying to take from the people you love most is simply, not here, not them, not on my watch. My father planted the first tomatoes 3 weeks ago. He sent me a picture, 2 small seedlings in a row, the soil dark and damp around them, his hand in the frame for scale. He had typed underneath the picture, in the careful way he texts with 2 fingers, look, they are already growing. I looked at that picture for a long time. Yeah, Dad, they really are.